So this is part one of my three-part series featuring the church and three separate interviews with three members of the band. And this week is Steve Kilbey kicking off the special. And Sarah Lapsley, who is a local musician here in Vancouver, most notable for her project Vancouver Nights, caught up with Steve. She is a big fan of the church and has recorded a fantastic interview. We've broken it up into three parts. And Sarah's actually going to be popping into the studio shortly to talk a little bit about her own interest in this band and how she came across Steve and the Sydney Opera House. This is definitely a peak moment in their career. So I'm sure listeners would know of the iconic Sydney Opera House in the Sydney Harbour, which is just an extraordinary venue, and I can only imagine the pristine sound that they would get there. Basically, the church celebrated their 30th anniversary with a special show that they called a Psychedelic Symphony, and it occurred on April 10th, 2001. And they were accompanied by George Ellis, a conductor, and the Symphony Orchestra of the University of Sydney. And the concert was filmed for a special DVD, which I guess is being edited at the moment. So that would be wonderful to see. Let's listen to what Sarah had to talk to Steve about.
We had I think it was like a 70-piece orchestra, and it was the New South Wales University Orchestra. And we sort of did a selection of all our, right across our career, and we did it as a 2-act sort of number. And for the second part of the show, for some reason, I'm not exactly sure, the orchestra dressed up in funny and silly clothes. And for the first part of the show, they were dressed just in a very somber black. But the orchestrations themselves were usually pretty good. Some of them were amazing. Some of them, when they joined in, they were suddenly when, like, you're playing a song and then suddenly, 30 violins join in, playing these incredibly powerful, fast little parts, all interlocking with the guitars. And then the cellos are stabbing away underneath, and the violas are droning the notes. And suddenly that joins in on something. It's like the whole opera house picked up and levitated 2 feet in the air.
Nice.
To me, anyway, that's the power of music. It's sort of irresistible. You can kind of, you can see the guy. I mean, the guy who wrote those parts, the conductor. I mean, he knows how it's done. I know how it's done. The guys in the band, we know how. But still, when the thing happens, and when you have all those people cooperating and bending their wills towards this effort, and what it is all these incredibly fast, powerful parts, all locking up with each other like a huge, giant clockwork machine, or even, one might say, it's like music of the spheres. It's like the cosmos in a kind of a musical microcosm, and all these parts locking up, and suddenly you can sort of it becomes mathematical. It becomes kind of spiritual, and kind of to me, playing it, and I could see people in the audience when the orchestra and the band hit these peaks, and it wasn't all night long, but when we did hit them, it was like an emotional overload for the people, and you can see it, and then they sit there, and then they have a cosmic experience, because their brains sort of can't take that much pleasure, particularly if it's their favourite song they're hearing as well, and they've been hearing it for 20 years, they've been waiting to hear it, and suddenly there it is, and there's this huge fucking loud orchestra sort of chiming in. That didn't happen all night. Sometimes it was like, oh yeah, there's the church, and there's an orchestra playing along behind them. You know what I mean? And that's pretty good. But other times it really happened, and when it happened, it's just like total, like a sort of a, like an orgasmic experience.
Sounds well worth the ticket price cosmic, orgasmic experience?
Oh yeah, no, it definitely was.
And we're back here with Stranded, the Australian Canadian Music Show, live on CiTR 101.9 FM, and the extra special show, the first part of the three-part church series. And first up, week one, is the exclusive interview with Steve Kilbey, recorded by Sarah Lapsley, who is a local musician and master's student currently. And just going back there, I've played a number of church songs. So way back at the start, we actually played Pangaea from the Untitled number 23 album, which is their brand new album. Also, we heard Louisiana, which was a single off the Hologram of Baal record. And then in that last set there, we heard a track from Heyday, the album Heyday. So we're going back in time here. The song was called Columbus. So that's from way back in the 80s. Of course, the band has been around for 30 years now. So Heyday is 1985, a real classic and favourite of mine. We heard Columbus from that record. And finally, you heard a Steve Kilbey solo track. That was Song of Solomon, off an album called The Slow Crack, which we actually have in vinyl here in the CiTR library, which is really great to come across. So Steve Kilbey, and so we heard the first part of the interview that Sarah did with Steve, and he spoke in glowing terms about the Opera House gig, the 30th anniversary Psychedelic Symphony. And Sarah is actually right here in the studio with me. She is a local musician, most famous for her work with Vancouver Nights. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Matt.
Thanks so much for actually being able to come in today, and thanks for doing the interview with Steve. It sounds wonderful, and we have two more parts to play. How did you come across the church?
Well, through this show, I was introduced to the church, and then they were coming on tour here to Seattle. But I was starting my brand new job like the same day or the next day, so I couldn't get away for the show, so I was really disappointed about that. But I started listening and checking out Steve's website, thetimebeing.com, and it's just a really great, colorful website with tons of stuff to look at. He's got videos and paintings and poems and music, and so I started kind of posting as part of the online community, so I got kind of tapped in that way, and Steve is very interactive with his fans, so it's fun. You feel like you know. Of
course, previously too, I mean, way back, you heard about them prior in the early 90s or 80s even?
I didn't really know who they were. It was like the very cool kids listened to the church, and it was almost like I wasn't cool enough to listen to the church, and I was a little bit young, I think, but no, it was only recently, just 2011, that I really got into them.
Yeah, well, and a flourishing love of the band has come forward, and this great interview with Steve, and it must have been great to chat with him.
Yeah, he's fun to talk to.
Yeah. Well, we've listened to one part of your interview so far. The second part is this is really great. This is Sarah talking to Steve about his latest project, which is a David Neil project. Now, explain to listeners exactly what this is. This pseudonym.
Well, on the website, he's got quite a few side projects, and I'm kind of confused about them all. But he started talking about David Neil, and the story that I picked up from the website was that he went on tour with this guy David Neil, like prior to beginning with the church, and that this David Neil guy was like this completely out of control, druggy, but like super charismatic, and women fell at his feet, and he was always getting into trouble, and he was kind of this tortured genius. And they even made videos where this sort of David Neil character is in it. And the story is that he died without really making an album, but he left some 2-inch tapes. And so Steve and Rick Mamie from Brian Jonestown Massacre like kind of pieced them together and then released it as a homage to David Neil. And I started picking up more information, like David Neil is Canadian and born in Saskatoon, and that he died this very bizarre death in an airplane that crashed at the same time as he was ODing, at the same time as the husband of one of his mistresses burst in to kill him. And I'm quite gullible,
What a rock and roll tale that sounds like.
So I was really just kind of piecing together this story in my mind, and so I decided I wanted, and I mean, then he posted the songs that they completed, and they were just incredible songs. Like, I thought they were like Spacemen 3 songs, kind of heavier, and so I wanted to ask Steve about David Neil, so I did in this interview clip we're going to play.
Okay, this is really interesting. We're going to play that right after this. We'll be right back with the Steve Kilbey special on Stranded.
Listen, if they're so hot, how come they're not tearing up the charts, babe?
Because you never play 'em, babe.
At CiTR, our hosts choose the music they play. That means our charts actually reflect the tastes of music lovers, as opposed to focus groups. So if you want to know what's really tearing up the charts, get your hands on a copy of Beatroot or Discorder magazine, or go online to CiTR.ca. CiTR's charts are based on actual spins motivated by actual preference. No payola, no marketing, just good tunes. Refreshing, no?
Okay, we're back here on Stranded, the Australian-Canadian Music Show, and we're here with Sarah Lapsley in the studio, and she just spoke with Steve Kilbey of The Church, the band from Australia, and we're playing the second part of her interview with Steve and David Neil, right, Sarah?
Yeah, it's about his project with David Neil.
Okay, so let's hear what Steve has to say about this really fascinating new project of his, the David Neil Project.
So you went from this kind of high of playing, the Sydney Opera House to another kind of tour just recently, right, in July?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that.
It is. Me and this character, Ricky Mimey, does loads of things. I guess his main thing is playing in the Brian Jonestown Massacre. We sort of got this guy, David Neil, and got this record, and we did a little tour selling and playing these David Neil songs, and it was kind of the opposite of the opera house. It was kind of clubs and pubs and bars, and some of them were great, and some of them were amazing, and some of them were a real pain in the arse, I wish I hadn't done. And certainly, as I walked out in these tiny, grubby rooms with nobody there, the irony of just having played the Opera House to, 2,500 people, sold out, standing room only crowd, sort of did occur to me, and I did think, what the fuck am I doing this? So, you've got to take everything on. But there is an energy and a kind of there is a certain aesthetic to be found in doing those things, some of the gigs we did were absolutely transcendental, and other ones just made me angry that I was standing there doing it in this bloody dive, and then other ones were sort of somewhere in the middle. So it's never always, it's rarely always just good. At where I am, if I could just sort of, if I was just a bit more popular, life might be a bit more easy, you know what I mean? It's like I always had, if I had more people buying my records, I had more people coming to my shows, so I could just sort of edge it up that next level, it would be a lot more comfortable. But then, then when you're on that level, you want to sort of edge up to the next, and that's the nature of the music business.
And it's gone through a lot of changes, in the last while. But
it sure has. It has. It's completely different. Completely different. Do you want me to rave on about that? I'd rather talk about aesthetic.
I'd rather talk, because
seriously, but I'm a kind of like a that movie, The Magician's Apprentice?
No.
With The Sorcerer's Apprentice, where Mickey Mouse tells the bucket to sort of clean the floor, and then the bucket can't stop. I'm a bit like that. If you sort of get me going on one subject, likely to have a 20-minute monologue.
Well, I was wanting to ask about...
The interview's over, and you know what I mean? So you've got to be careful what you sort of point me, in which direction you point me.
Well, I was curious about David Neil because it's been a labor of love for you, and I wasn't sure of the story. And considering he's Canadian, maybe you could just tell us a little bit.
Canadian, yeah. He is Canadian, and boy, Saskatoon, you know, it's a lonely place to grow up in those long, dark, cold winters, and you know, what could he do but to play a guitar? And you know, as soon as he could, he got out of there. But I guess, I don't know, I guess not many Canadians really know much about him. Maybe that's a good thing.
So how long was he active as a musician?
He died when he was, 24?
Wow.
So, I don't know, 5 years.
And at what point did you connect with him? So you were young as well.
You know he's not a real character, don't you?
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that.
Well, he's not a real person.
Are you serious? Sorry, I'm like laughing. No, I totally believed it. I mean, that makes sense because I'm a completely gullible person. So you've created sort of an alter ego? You're laughing at me right now.
I'm not laughing at you at all because I sort of never know. Sometimes I lead people on and tell them all these stories about him, and then I feel bad if people starting to go, hang on a minute, what, you know what I mean? I don't want people to think I am laughing at them, and that's actually why I'm laughing. I'm laughing at sort of the point. It's like if you've gone home with a woman from a bar, and at what point does she say to you, look, actually I'm a transsexual? It's a bit like this happens in every interview. So suddenly I realise I do have to say that David Neil is actually not a real character.
So you wrote all those songs then for the wilderness years?
Yeah. Well, me and Ricky wrote those songs. Yeah.
Oh, well, they're marvelous songs. You know, I just thought, well, this guy David Neil is like a genius.
Right. Well, I'll tell you one strange thing about it, though. The more I play those songs, and every now and then when I listen to the record, and with everything about it, the more I'm feeling, the more I'm starting to get an idea who David Neil really is or was. And it's like, suddenly it's like, if it's just very strange. The whole thing is strange, and it's really led me to, as does everything about the internet and everything really leads one to ask the nature of reality. Like what? I don't know. Anyway, David Neil, yeah, he's sort of. I feel his presence so strongly that if I made another record, I think it'd be even easier, and I think he would be sort of, whatever it is, it's sort of like we seem to have woken some feeling that wanted us to do this. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, of course we wrote the songs and stuff, but there was some supernatural overall guiding spirit that made this record come out like this, and it's got sort of so much freshness and sort of naivety and sort of, but it's not like a naive painter who is going, oh, I'm going to be naive. It's like genuine naivety that comes through in the record, even though I'm a jaded old rocker, and I'd say Ricky's a jaded, not so old rocker. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Somehow we conjured up a record of sort of that people would listen to, and when they hear a bit of the story, they kind of think, oh, there is a David Neil, and that's quite successful, I think.
So we're back here with Stranded, the Australian-Canadian Music Show, and part one of the three-part series on the church. And today featuring the Sarah Lapsley interview with Steve Kilbey, the lyricist from the band. And you just heard there 2 tracks from the David Neil project, the Steve Kilbey David Neil project. And we heard Sarah ask all about that. And it turns out he's a fictional character from Saskatoon.
Duped.
And speaking of doop doop doodaloop doo, Nardwa, the human serviette, today, I said, Nardwa, I'm talking to Sarah, and she said, Sarah might know a gentleman named Mark Clymer, who was in a band called Sisters Lovers, who somehow disappeared to Saskatoon.
Yes, Mark Kleiner, known as Kleins, and the band was Sister Lovers, and then he disbanded that and formed Jungle. So he was like a local kind of legend. And it's funny because he kind of is a bit David Neil-like, I guess, but he had a lot of charisma and like a real rock star kind of character with a real freshness. I think Kilbey was talking about how David Neil was fresh. Yeah, so he went back to Saskatoon and then I think became like a Lutheran minister or something.
Joined a church, in inverted commas.
He joined a church, but actually I think he's back in Vancouver, but I haven't seen hide nor hair of him for years. But he was quite a wild character. I remember he totally had this obsession with Nico Case, and he bought her this mink coat he saved as like money, and bought her this mink coat and presented it to her. And I don't think she was all that like impressed by it, but yeah.
Well, maybe he was
back in the day.
Maybe he was some kind of incarnation of the mysterious David Neil from Saskatoon.
Yeah.
Anyway,
the spirit has fled, and a new Holy Spirit has.
And landed in some great music there that Steve Kilbey has created. So anyway, we have one more part of your interview that you recorded with Steve, and this is a great part where he's talking about creative inspiration because, of course, he's quite the Renaissance man in the real traditional sense, a painter, a poet, songwriter. So what can you tell me about this part of the interview?
Yeah, I've heard him talk about creativity before, and it was really impressive. Like, he's someone who's really stayed sort of connected to his muse, and unlike other people who've kind of become decrepit, you know, he could have gone that way with his drug addiction, but he actually is like this picture of health, and you know, is involved in all these mediums and still really active and still really youthful artistically. So, and he's very conscious of his creative process. So it's nice to hear him talk about it. So.
Yeah, it's very fresh.
Yeah, fresh. Well, yeah, totally fresh.
Exactly. So let's hear this last part of the interview. Steve Kilbey talking to Sarah Lapsley all about creativity. This is really great. Listen up.
And I very much kind of believe in that you have access to this, that an artist sort of has access to this huge well of human experience. And that's why all the time people have been writing to me and going, oh, I didn't know anybody else thought that thought, or I can't believe that you've said this thought out loud that I've always thought. And I used to think that about the people who, like David, like especially Mark Bolan and David Bowie, when I was sort of in a susceptible age in my teenage years, constantly kept flooring me how they were kind of saying that, or they were sort of they weren't so much, it wasn't so much a philosophy, but it would just be like small tiny things that would be in their lyrics that would kind of have an incredible resonance with me, that would really impress me. So somehow artists dip into this sort of huge well and pull stuff out and when other people come across that, it sort of really does the trick.
Yeah, like you seem very tuned into that wellspring, and so it keeps you vital in terms of all the different things that you do, from painting to writing and poetry and your music and so on.
Yeah, the thing is that the well is easily accessible, but most people have kind of sealed themselves, that they're stopping it from getting in, and the well is all around waiting to burst into them, but they've kind of made a little wall, and they can't seem to get into it at will. I guess that's why it's the sort of collective unconscious or subconscious or whatever it is. It's like, it's not accessible by will. If it was, then everyone would be fucking Picasso or Rembrandt or someone, or J.R.R. Tolkien. if everybody could just jump in there, but they can't. So what happens is there's sort of us, sort of loony artist types, and believe me, everyone who's doing anything that's worth thinking about is kind of quite a lunatic. And sort of we're out there and sort of trying to, or getting through to it, and sort of excavating little bits that we can, and kind of catching it and bringing it back out for everyone to have a look at, or the people who like that kind of thing. Or maybe it's not actually down somewhere, it's more like you're going up into some sort of ether.
So there we have it, the Steve Kilbey chat that Sarah Lapsley did on the phone. Steve was talking, I guess, from his home in Bondi in Sydney, and that was all about creativity. And I've read him elsewhere say that my cup overfloweth. He's very fortunate to be able to tap into that wellspring of inspiration, and there he articulated how, I guess, he does that. So, yeah.
Well, thanks for having me in, Matt. I appreciate the opportunity to talk on CiTR.
Oh, no problem. It's great to have you on and contribute to this special. So we do have 2 more parts of the special coming up. I've already recorded interviews with Peter Coppice and Marty Wilson-Piper, the 2 guitarists from the church. So they're ready to be edited in the suite. So in the coming weeks, we'll feature those. So today you heard Sarah talking to Steve to kick off this celebration of the church.